Welcome to Terrifying Exorcism. Tonight we open the pages of a case buried in shadows, a story from France in 1870, where a young woman's journal refused to burn, and what followed became one of the most disturbing accounts of possession in European history. The church tried to silence it, the family tried to hide it, but the writings kept returning, wet and alive, as if the evil itself demanded to be remembered. Stay with me, because what you're about to hear is not a tale. It is a documented struggle between faith, fear, and something that refused to let go. But before we begin, I want to know, what time is it where you are right now, and from which place in the world are you watching this? The account begins with a contradiction. In the archives of the parish of Saint-Martin, in a village north of Orléans, there lies a note written in the winter of 1870. The note is short, written in the hand of Father Claude Beauchesne. We burned her journal as instructed, yet the following morning the ashes were damp. The pages seemed to reform in fragments, as though they resisted fire. I cannot explain this. It is a single paragraph, almost careless in its brevity. Yet the case that follows is anything but brief. Villagers, doctors, and clerics would all give testimony, some in agreement, others in contradiction. The girl's family, broken by what they witnessed, never spoke of her again. What remains are fragments, recollections, medical notes, and these parish records. The girl at the center of it all was Marie-Claire Duval, born in 1854, the youngest of 3 daughters. By 1870 she was 16, described by neighbors as quiet, often lost in thought though capable of sudden laughter. Her father, Etienne, was a carpenter, and her mother, Louise, kept the home. They were not wealthy, but neither were they destitute. Their cottage stood at the edge of the woods where the ground sloped into wetlands. At first glance, nothing in her upbringing suggested what was to come. The Duvals were church-going, though not zealously so. Marie-Claire could read and write, thanks to her uncle, a former schoolmaster. She kept a journal, a habit unusual for girls of her station, in which she recorded daily life with a diligence bordering on obsession. Her elder sisters later testified that the first signs were barely noticeable. A tendency to wake in the night, speaking aloud as though answering someone. Long silences at the dinner table. A reluctance to touch food, claiming it smelled of iron. It was November of 1869 when her condition sharpened. The Franco-Prussian War was stirring unrest in the region, and many men had left for service. Tension in the town was high. Sickness and shortages wore on the families. It was in this climate that Marie-Claire began to write entries that unsettled even those accustomed to her private nature. One surviving page, quoted later by Father Beauchesne, read, "There is a voice that comes in the window when all is dark. I do not ask it to come. It knows things I have not said aloud." The sisters claimed they dismissed this at first as the dramatics of a young girl, but in the weeks that followed, she became prone to fainting spells. Her mother called for the local physician, Dr. Giraud, who examined her in December. His notes survive. Patient is pale, fatigued, given to bouts of sudden trembling. No fever, no evident lesions. She reports a pressure on the chest when alone at night. Pulse irregular but not alarming. I prescribe rest, warmth, and diluted wine for strength. The prescription had no effect. In fact, her condition worsened. Her appetite disappeared almost entirely. She sat for long hours by the hearth, staring into the fire until her mother shook her from it. When asked what she thought of, she said only, "It is not my thought." By January, strange rumors circulated. Neighbors claimed to hear noises from the Duval house at night. Chairs dragging, knocks on the walls, whispers that carried farther than they should. One woman swore she saw Marie-Claire standing outside at dawn in only her nightdress, barefoot in the frost, eyes closed, lips moving silently. Her father began to insist on keeping her journal locked away, saying she wrote things not proper for a Christian girl. When pressed, he would not explain. But it is clear the family feared her writings more than her silences. The local parish finally took notice after Candlemas. During the service, witnesses claim Marie-Claire collapsed near the altar. The priest and her family rushed to her side. According to accounts, she whispered something unintelligible. Father Beauchesne wrote that it sounded like Latin, though her schooling had never gone beyond basic French. When she came to, she claimed to remember nothing. The church hesitated to act. In 1870, France was increasingly skeptical of superstition, and the clergy were cautious about being accused of backwardness. Father Beauchesne urged patience. "It may be nervous illness," he wrote. "Not all darkness comes from below." Still, the journals persisted. The family, in desperation, showed a portion of them to the priest. They contained sentences written in a hand more jagged than her own. Some made no sense at all. Others seemed chillingly coherent. "They speak of her as though she were not mine, but she is, and she will not eat what they give, for she eats what I give." It was then, in February of 1870, that the priest advised burning the journal. The family gathered it into the hearth, and by all accounts, it burned swiftly. Ashes and fragments scattered into the cold. Yet the following morning, as noted at the start, the remains were damp, as if soaked, though no water had touched them. Some scraps of pages seemed intact, words still legible though they should have been destroyed. This was the first event that several witnesses agreed could not be explained by illness nor imagination. But it would not be the last. In the days following the burning, Marie Claire's condition changed in ways that alarmed even the most skeptical in her household. Her sisters recalled that she began to withdraw entirely from ordinary conversation. Where before she had been quiet, now she was unresponsive, as though listening to something distant. At times she would tilt her head, like a person straining to catch a faint sound, then smile faintly, inappropriately. Her mother pressed her to explain these smiles. Marie Claire, after a long pause, answered, "It is when he says something amusing." When asked who, she simply fell silent. Dr. Giraud was summoned again in March. He found her thinner, her skin sallow, her pulse unsteady. He noted irritability of the nerves and recommended that she be taken outdoors into the air and sun. But when her father attempted to bring her to the village square one morning, she resisted with surprising strength. She clung to the doorframe, shouting that the stones bite. Neighbors witnessed this and murmured among themselves. Rumors of witchcraft began to attach themselves to the family. In that period, though France was officially modernizing, countryside superstition ran deep. Whispers circulated in the taverns that Marie Claire had been seen with wild herbs near the marsh, that she muttered to herself when fetching water. None of these claims were verified, but the climate of fear made them believable. One evening in mid-March, Etienne Duval confided to a neighbor that he no longer trusted the night in his own home. He claimed to hear scratching within the walls, not of mice but of something heavier, like fingernails against wood. His wife, pale and exhausted, said she woke to find their daughter standing over her bed in silence. When asked what she wanted, the girl whispered, "He says you are afraid. He likes that." The parish records show that Father Beauchesne at first resisted labeling this as possession. His entries reflect a cautious skepticism. "She is young, impressionable, and suffering from a nervous malady. The journals disturb me, but paper can deceive more easily than flesh. We must not leap to devils when medicine has not yet spoken." Yet the villagers' accounts pressed otherwise. One farmer, Bernard Roux, later testified that he saw her near the field's edge at dawn. She stood barefoot in mud, her dress damp to the knees, though no rain had fallen. "Her eyes were open," he said, "but I swear they did not see me. She was murmuring as though in conversation. I could not hear the words, but they were too fast for prayer." Her sisters, frightened but protective, tried to hide these episodes from outsiders. But the more they concealed, the more the girl's behavior slipped through cracks into public view. On Palm Sunday during the procession, Marie Claire clutched her chest and cried out, "It burns." Witnesses swore she was not near the incense, nor had she touched the blessed branches. The physician, pressed by the family, suggested hysteria. He argued that women her age, under the strain of war and shortages, could manifest such symptoms without external cause. He prescribed laudanum in small measure. The tincture calmed her for several hours at a time, but soon the fits returned stronger. She thrashed in her sleep, muttered in tongues unknown, and on more than one occasion her arms stiffened in grotesque positions that frightened her sisters. One night Louise, her mother, recorded in her own shaky hand. She lay upon the bed as if nailed, her body straight and stiff, her head turned aside, mouth whispering though she slept. I tried to wake her, but she did not stir. It lasted near an hour. When at last she woke, she asked why I had been crying. The journals themselves became a source of terror. Though the family claimed to have burned them, new pages appeared, folded under her pillow, tucked into the hearth, even slipped between pages of the Bible. The handwriting was the same jagged scrawl, often written in ink, though no pen or inkpot was found near her. One such page read, "The fire does not hold me. The flame is a door, and I walk back through." The family grew desperate. They pleaded with the parish for formal intervention, but Beauchesne hesitated. The bishop in Orléans had warned his priests against encouraging peasant fears with medieval rites. To suggest exorcism without absolute certainty risked scandal. And yet the pressure mounted. The villagers, unsettled by what they heard, began to avoid the Duval home. Mothers warned their children not to walk past the lane after dusk. Merchants grew reluctant to sell bread to Louise, muttering that no household with such shadows can be free of blame. The Duvals, once modest but respected, found themselves isolated. Even Etienne, a carpenter whose work had served half the village, saw orders dwindle. Poverty and stigma closed in together. Through all this, Marie-Claire herself seemed strangely detached. At moments she wept like a child, clinging to her sisters. At others, she laughed suddenly, without cause. On one occasion she told her mother, "I do not like when you cry. He says your tears taste bitter." It was after this that Father Beauchesne could no longer ignore the case. His entry in April marks a change in tone. The child is not merely unwell. There is in her a speech that is not hers, knowledge she cannot own. I have heard words in Latin from her lips, though she has never studied. She repeats phrases from scripture she has never read. And most grave, she laughs when they are spoken in rebuke. I will begin inquiries. This decision brought conflict. The doctor protested that the church would inflame hysteria and harm the girl further. Some villagers agreed, insisting it was an illness. Others whispered that delay would cost not only the child's soul, but bring misfortune on them all. The tension broke on Easter Sunday. During the Mass, when the bells rang, Marie-Claire shrieked so loudly that the congregation froze. Witnesses swore her voice was not her own, deeper, layered, as though more than one spoke through her. She collapsed, rigid, her body striking the stone floor. When her father tried to lift her, she spat blood upon his shirt, though her mouth bore no wound. The church fell into panic. Some fled. Others prayed aloud. Beauchesne, pale and trembling, declared that the matter could no longer be postponed. Within days, he wrote to the bishop in Orléans, requesting permission for a formal inquiry. The reply, preserved in the parish archive, was cautious, urging restraint and investigation before any ritual action. And so began the slow, reluctant path toward what would later be described as one of the most troubling possession cases in that region of France. But in those first weeks of spring, no one yet knew how far it would go, nor how much it would destroy. In the weeks after Easter, the Duval household became the site of constant unease. The letter to the bishop had been sent, but answers were slow to come. Days stretched into silence, leaving the family suspended between fear and uncertainty. Meanwhile, word of the Easter incident spread across the parish. Farmers, washerwomen, and innkeepers all repeated their versions of what they saw: the shriek, the fall, the voice that sounded not like a young girl, but like something older, heavier. Each retelling added to the weight pressing upon the priest. Father Beauchesne's hesitation began to look like cowardice in the eyes of his parishioners. He visited the Duval home more frequently, often in the evenings, always carrying his breviary, though he seldom opened it. His notes from that period, still preserved in the parish archive, show a man caught between pastoral duty and gnawing doubt. The family pleads with me. They believe with certainty that the child is possessed. Yet I am torn. The bishop warns against rashness, and I fear ridicule. But I have now heard words pass her lips that she could not know. Last night, when asked to recite the Lord's Prayer, she stopped midway and smiled, saying the end before I could speak it aloud. Her eyes fixed on me, and I swear there was mockery in them. How does she know? The neighbors, too, continued to report disturbances. A widow across the lane claimed that she saw candlelight moving behind the Duval's shutters at hours when the family said no candles were lit. Another swore she heard singing, not a hymn, but a low, wordless chant, seeping from the walls of their house. Inside the family itself, fractures grew. Etienne tried to maintain authority, insisting that the girl's writings and mutterings were tricks born of nerves. He attempted to strike her once, during a fit, but Louise threw herself between them. Her diary, far less detailed than her daughter's journals, but no less poignant, records her despair. My husband does not see what I see. He believes she is a child gone willful, but when she looks at me in the night, it is not my daughter's face. I cannot make him believe. The sisters bore the brunt of it in silence. Jean, the eldest, took to sleeping beside Marie-Claire for fear of leaving her alone. She confided later that she often woke to find her sister sitting upright, staring at the rafters, lips moving. When asked what she was doing, Marie-Claire would only reply, "Listening." The doctor's visits became strained. Dr. Giraud, increasingly frustrated with what he called the interference of superstition, began to suspect collusion. He wrote, "The girl is ill, yes, but no demon stalks her. I believe the family, the mother especially, encourages her delusions, whether consciously or not. The priest lends credence. This is dangerous. The mind is fragile, and if convinced of devils, it will manifest devils." Yet his medical reasoning did little to calm the village. Fear had already taken hold. Children crossed themselves when passing the Duval home. Women whispered prayers when Marie-Claire's name was spoken. By late April, the bishop's reply finally arrived. It was cautious, even scolding. "You are to investigate with prudence. Do not presume the presence of spirits where nervous disease or deceit may suffice. Interview the family, the physician, and the girl. Only after careful discernment may any further step be considered." This placed Beauchesne in an impossible position. If he obeyed, he risked alienating his parishioners, who already accused him of inaction. If he defied the bishop, he risked censure or removal. He began reluctantly to conduct his own inquiries. He questioned neighbors, examined the girl's journals, and spoke privately with the sisters. What emerged was a picture of consistency. Each described the same behaviors, the same episodes, too consistent perhaps to dismiss. On the night of April 29th, he conducted what he called a test of discernment. He brought a small vial of holy water, discreetly hidden in his pocket. While speaking with the girl, he sprinkled a few drops onto her hand, pretending to adjust the oil lamp. The result was immediate. Marie-Claire drew back sharply, hissing through her teeth, though no burn or mark appeared. Her breathing quickened, and her eyes fixed on him with a look that several witnesses later described as not her own. She said, in a voice low and strained, "You hide nothing from me." The moment passed as quickly as it came. She slumped into her chair, confused, asking why everyone was staring. This convinced Beauchesne more than any rumor. His diary for that night reads, "If deception, it is masterful. If sickness, it is beyond my learning. If evil, then God help us." But still he hesitated to name it aloud. Instead, he wrote again to the bishop, urging permission for formal prayers of deliverance. The wait for response, however, would be long. The war had stretched communication thin, and many matters were delayed. In the meantime, the disturbances deepened. On the night of May 3rd, the sisters were awakened by a sound like weeping. They followed it to the kitchen, where they found their sister crouched by the hearth, pages of paper spread before her. She was dipping her fingers into the ash and scrawling words onto the stones. The words were backwards, written in mirror script. When Louise tried to stop her, Marie-Claire looked up and said, "He writes better with my hands." The family, shaken, sent for Beauchesne again. He arrived at dawn and found the hearth smeared with dark shapes that indeed resembled letters, though uneven and smeared. He ordered them washed away, but the marks faintly seemed to bleed through even after scrubbing. Tensions in the village reached breaking point. Some demanded the girl be taken away, for safety of all. Others whispered of burning her journals again, this time burying the ashes at the crossroads. But Etienne refused to let outsiders dictate his household, and yet even he could not deny what happened on May 10th. During a sudden thunderstorm, the family huddled together, the roof leaking under heavy rain. A clap of thunder shook the house, and in the same instant, the window pane shattered inward, though no branch had struck it. Marie-Claire, seated by the wall, began to laugh. Witnesses swore she did not move her lips, yet the laughter rang clear, layered, echoing, as though several voices joined at once. It was this event that broke Father Beauchesne's restraint. The following morning he declared to the congregation that he would take all steps necessary to defend the soul of this child. He did not yet call it possession, but everyone knew what he meant. The bishop's approval had not yet arrived, but in practice the exorcism had already begun. Though no word of it was spoken aloud. In the dim kitchen of the Duval home, by the weak light of a single candle, Father Beauchesne began to recite the minor prayers of deliverance. He did so quietly, not in the solemn grandeur of a church rite, but in a tone half-whispered as if ashamed. His hands trembled over the crucifix he held, the beads of his rosary slipping too quickly between his fingers. Marie-Claire sat across from him, her thin frame hunched, her eyes shadowed. She seemed calm at first, even drowsy. Her sisters held her shoulders, fearful she might collapse or thrash. But when the priest uttered the words, "Adjuro te, spiritus immunde," I adjure thee, unclean spirit, her eyes flicked open. Jean later recalled that her expression changed in an instant. She looked at him with a kind of weariness, as though she had been waiting for him to begin, and then she smiled. The priest faltered. He had expected resistance or fear, but not that smile. He continued, his Latin stumbling. At the phrase invoking the Virgin, Marie-Claire whispered something inaudible, but the family swore it was Latin also, though none could later repeat the words. The session ended without violence. She slumped into sleep, pale and trembling, her breathing shallow. Beauchesne withdrew, shaken. In his notes he confessed, "I feel I fight shadows with shadows. The bishop delays, and yet the evil does not delay. Each night it grows." The secrecy of his actions did not last. Neighbors noticed his frequent visits, and whispers spread that the priest was conducting forbidden rites. Some said he endangered the parish by invoking demons in private homes. Others praised his courage, saying only a true shepherd would defy orders for the sake of a child's soul. The division hardened. Dr. Giraud, when he learned of these prayers, was furious. He confronted Beauchesne outside the church, accusing him of worsening the girl's madness. Witnesses recall the scene, the doctor, red-faced, shouting that, "You make her sicker with your Latin mutterings. She needs treatment, not superstition." The priest replied softly but firmly, "You treat the body, doctor. But what if it is not the body that is afflicted?" Their argument split the town into factions. The educated and skeptical sided with the doctor. The older and more devout rallied behind the priest. In taverns and in fields, the debate continued. Was Marie-Claire a sick girl, or was she a battleground between heaven and hell? Through it all, the Duval family lived in terror. Nights became unbearable. Strange sounds haunted the cottage, the dragging of something heavy across the floorboards, though nothing had moved. Sudden knocks that came in threes, low whispers near the rafters that ceased when a candle was lit. On May 14th, Louise swore she woke to find the crucifix above the bed turned upside down. Her husband accused her of imagining it, but when she righted it, the nail slipped free and it fell to the floor with a crack. The following evening, Marie-Claire refused food again, claiming it was full of ash. She grew weaker, her skin stretched taut over her bones. And yet, when her father tried to force broth to her lips, she resisted with strength that startled him. He later admitted to Beauchesne, "It was like pressing against iron. She is wasting away, yet I could not move her arms." Despite his doubts, Etienne could no longer ignore the unnatural. The bishop's silence grew heavier by the day. Some said the letter had been lost to the chaos of war. Others whispered that the bishop deliberately ignored such petitions, fearing ridicule in Paris. Whatever the reason, no reply came. So Beauchesne continued in secret to perform nightly prayers at the Duval home. They were not full exorcisms, but fragments, psalms, invocations, blessings. Sometimes Marie-Claire seemed calmer after them, falling into deep sleep. Other times she reacted violently, spitting, laughing, or speaking in voices not her own. One such night, May 18th, she whispered to him, "You are tired, Claude. He says you have no faith left." The priest staggered, struck not only by the words, but by the use of his given name. He had never permitted the girl to address him so familiarly. His notes that night are the most personal. "She knows my weakness. She speaks of my doubts aloud. I have prayed against despair, but tonight it clung to me like a cloak. If this is her cleverness, it is cruel beyond her years. If it is another speaking through her, then I am already lost in this battle." The Duvals began to notice strange phenomena with her journal again. Though the original had been burned, new pages continued to surface. Folded beneath her mattress, tucked into her shoes, once even inside the priest's breviary after a session. These pages were always damp, the ink smudged, the letters curling as though written in haste. One page, recovered on May 20th, contained only a single line. "She is mine in silence, she is mine in song, and the fire cannot close the door." The villagers grew restless. Some pressed for her removal to an asylum in Orléans, arguing she endangered the whole parish. Others threatened darker measures, muttering of witches' punishment. Louise lived in constant fear that one night a mob might come for her daughter, and yet, in rare moments, Marie-Claire returned to herself. Jeanne recalled that, on a clear afternoon, she sat with her sister by the well. For nearly an hour they spoke of ordinary things, the chickens, the garden, the sound of the bells. She seemed almost herself again, Jeanne said later. But as the bells rang vespers, Marie-Claire fell silent. She looked at the sky and whispered, "He is louder than they are." The reprieve was gone. By late May, even the skeptical doctor admitted her condition was beyond explanation. He wrote to a colleague in Orléans, requesting consultation, though it is unclear if the letter was ever answered. In his last surviving note on the case, he conceded, "I cannot heal what I cannot name. If she believes herself taken by something beyond flesh, then perhaps belief itself is the sickness. Yet belief once rooted is as unshakable as any fever." That night, May 27th, the Duvals claimed the most terrifying event yet occurred. The family was gathered in the kitchen when the shutters slammed open by themselves, though the air was still. The candle guttered, nearly going out. And then, faint but clear, the sound of pages turning, though no book was open. From Marie-Claire's lips came a whisper, not in her voice, but in another, lower, measured, deliberate, "Write this down." The words hung in the air long after the whisper ceased. No one in the Duval household moved. Etienne swore later that he felt the hair on his arms rise, though the room itself was cold. Louise clutched her rosary so tightly that the beads cut her palm. Jeanne began to weep. Marie-Claire slumped forward on the table, her breath shallow. When her father tried to lift her, she stirred and said weakly, "Did I sleep? Why are you frightened?" No one answered. That night, Father Beauchesne remained in the cottage until dawn. He prayed silently in the corner, refusing to leave the family unattended. When morning broke, he found a folded slip of paper on the floor near his chair. The handwriting was the same jagged scrawl as before. It read, "You are the scribe now." He burned the note in the hearth, though the ashes once again smouldered longer than paper should. The following days deepened the family's torment. Marie-Claire's voice began to change. It was not constant. She often spoke in her usual tone, frightened and weary. But at unpredictable moments, her words grew lower, more deliberate, carrying an edge that seemed too heavy for her small frame. The sisters described it as though another mouth spoke through hers. On June 2nd, during supper, she suddenly pushed her bowl away and declared, "This food is for beasts." When her father tried to insist, she leaned close to him and whispered in that same foreign voice, "You will bury her before you bury me." Etienne recoiled. From that night on, he could no longer deny what his wife had long feared. The parish grew restless once more. News of the whispers and the strange voices had spread. At market, women refused to stand near Louise. Children taunted Jeanne and Marguerite, calling their sister La Fille du Diable. Some men in the tavern suggested the family should leave the village altogether before misfortune spread like rot. The Duvals could not leave. They had neither money nor kin elsewhere, and so they endured. Father Beauchesne, trapped between obedience and compassion, continued his unsanctioned visits. His faith, however, grew unsteady. On June 6th, he confessed privately to his journal, "When I enter that house, I feel a heaviness in the air, as if my breath thickens. My prayers falter on my tongue. I believe, yet I do not believe. If the bishop denies me, what am I to do? Still, I cannot abandon them." The doctor, hearing rumors of these clandestine prayers, returned in anger. He accused the priest of negligence, declaring that Latin mutterings are poison for the mind. When asked what he himself prescribed, he faltered. Laudanum had failed. Tonic had failed. His only answer was rest, but the girl seemed beyond it. By mid-June, the manifestations had grown physical. Jeanne awoke one morning to find long scratches across her arm. She swore she had not scratched herself, nor had her sister been near her. Louise discovered fresh pages under Marie-Claire's pillow, the words smeared with something darker than ink. Though she did not say it aloud, she feared it was blood. The content of these writings grew more sinister. She cries when he touches her hair. I laugh because she cannot stop him. The priest prays with his lips, not with his heart. I see the doubt, and it feeds me. When the bells ring, I will not be there, but she will scream. These pages, damp and foul-smelling, were gathered by the priest and hidden away in the parish chest. He dared not show them to anyone, fearing ridicule or worse, belief. On June 15th, an event occurred that forced the matter into the open. During Vespers, as the congregation knelt in silence, a cry erupted from the back pew. Marie-Claire, pale and trembling, had been brought by her sisters in hopes of prayer. Now she convulsed, falling into the aisle. Witnesses claimed her limbs bent at impossible angles, her back arching as though pulled by invisible cords. The priest rushed to her side, attempting to calm her with whispered psalms. But before his words could finish, her mouth opened and a sound burst forth, not a scream but laughter. Harsh, echoing, layered, as though several voices laughed at once. The church, filled with candlelight and silence, shook with it. The congregation fled in panic. Only a few men remained to help carry her home. From that night on, the Duvals' isolation became near total. Few dared to visit, and those who did often left quickly, crossing themselves upon departure. Rumors swirled that the girl was a witch, or that the family had welcomed demons through her writings. Some claimed the marshland itself had cursed them. Beauchesne, cornered, wrote once more to the bishop, this time in urgent, pleading tone, "If you do not grant me authority, I will act without it. The child wastes away before our eyes. The villagers sharpen their suspicion into hatred. If nothing is done, there will be not only a lost soul, but blood on the ground." The reply, if it came, is not recorded in the parish archive. What is recorded is Beauchesne's next act. On June 20th, with only the family as witnesses, he prepared the house for what he called a prayer of expulsion. He sprinkled holy water at the threshold, lit a candle before a crucifix, and placed the breviary open on the table. His voice, though trembling, was louder than before. As he began the prayers, Marie-Claire writhed in her chair, muttering words that none recognized. At the invocation of the Trinity, she spat on the floor. At the invocation of the Virgin, she screamed, not loud but sharp, piercing, as though the sound came from deep inside her chest. The family wept, clinging to one another. Etienne gripped the table until his knuckles whitened. The priest pressed on, though his voice cracked. He commanded the spirit to depart. He pressed the crucifix to her forehead. For a moment she stilled, her eyes closed, her breathing slowed. Then she whispered in a voice not hers, "You will burn the book again, but the pages will be waiting." The candle extinguished without a draught, and the house fell silent. The silence after the candle's sudden extinguishing lingered like a weight. No one in the Duval household spoke. The priest's crucifix trembled in his hand. Marie-Claire sat slumped in her chair, her head bowed as if she had fainted. For a moment, it seemed the ordeal was over. Etienne stepped forward, calling softly to his daughter. Louise reached for her hand. But when their fingers touched, they recoiled. The skin was clammy, damp, as if she had been pulled from water. Beauchesne whispered another prayer under his breath, his words stumbling. He replaced the crucifix on the table, his eyes fixed on the extinguished candle. There had been no draught, no window open, no explanation. That night, Marie-Claire lay unusually still in her bed. She neither stirred nor murmured. Louise remained beside her, fearful of sleep. She later told the priest that she heard faint scratching beneath the floorboards, like nails dragging across the wood. Each time she bent close to listen, the sound stopped. At dawn, when Etienne opened the shutters, he found a folded sheet of paper wedged in the sill. It was damp again, though no rain had fallen. The words, uneven and smeared, read, "When the fire dies, I rise." He burned the paper at once, though his hands shook so violently he dropped it twice before the flame consumed it. The attempted prayer of expulsion became known in the village within 2 days. Someone had seen the priest leaving the house in the small hours, pale and sweating. Soon, whispers filled the square, that the priest had failed, that the girl could not be saved, that God himself had turned his face from her. Some accused Beauchesne of pride, of meddling without the bishop's consent. Others claimed he had already made a pact with the evil, that his presence in the house only invited more unrest. His congregation dwindled. On Sundays, half the pews sat empty. Still, he returned to the Duval home, though less boldly now. His journal from June 22nd reads, "I fear I have done more harm than good. The child wastes away, and the family clings to me like drowning souls. Yet I have no authority, no right, only prayers that fall back upon me like ash. When I touch the crucifix, my hand feels colder, not warmer." Marie-Claire's health faltered further. She ate little, her cheeks hollowed, her lips cracked, but her strength, disturbingly, seemed unchanged during her outbursts. Jeanne described one evening when her sister, though weak as a fevered child moments before, seized the edge of the table and overturned it with a single jerk. The family began to fear her, even when she appeared herself. Louise admitted that at times she no longer saw her daughter in her face. "It is her skin," she whispered to the priest, "but not her eyes." On June 25th, Etienne sought the doctor again, out of desperation. The physician, weary of the matter, offered only more laudanum. When Etienne pressed him, demanding some other explanation, the doctor sighed and said, "Then I will tell you plain. If the girl does not cease these disturbances, the village will not let her remain. They will act. Already there are men who speak of it." That night, Etienne told his wife what the doctor had warned. Louise paled, clutching her rosary. She whispered, "Then they will kill her." Signs of hostility soon appeared. On the morning of June 27th, a wooden cross was found hammered into the Duval's door. It was not a blessing, but a warning, a mark to keep others away. A smear of red, animal blood perhaps, streaked across the threshold. Jeanne wept when she saw it. Father Beauchesne tried to calm them, promising that God's mercy would prevail. But even he avoided touching the mark. The pressure weighed on him heavily. He wrote again to the bishop, though he knew another letter would likely vanish into silence. This time he threatened resignation. "If you deny me again, I will abandon this parish. I cannot serve a church that commands me to look away while evil devours a child before my eyes." On June 29th, another chilling event occurred. Jeanne woke screaming in the middle of the night. She claimed she had felt hands on her throat pressing hard. The others rushed to her side, only to find red marks across her skin, distinct and uneven as if from long fingers. Marie-Claire had been asleep across the room, or so they thought. But when Louise went to her bed, she found her eyes wide open, fixed on her sister. And on the wall above the bed, faint letters scrawled in soot spelled out, "She belongs to me." The soot came from nowhere. The hearth had not been lit for 2 days. By July, the Duvals were living in a state of siege. Neighbors no longer greeted them on the road. Stones were left on their doorstep as silent warnings. The sisters could not attend Mass without being hissed at. Rumors spread that livestock fell ill near their land. Marie-Claire herself seemed suspended between 2 states, frail, sickly silence and violent, mocking eruptions. On July 3rd, during one such eruption, she turned to her father and said clearly, in a voice that did not waver, "You will dig 2 graves, one for me, one for the one who prays." Etienne did not speak of it aloud, but when Beauchesne next came, he would not meet his eyes. The priest too began to wither. His sermons shortened. His hair, already graying, seemed to lose its color altogether. He prayed constantly, but without conviction. "I fear," he wrote in his journal on July 5th, "that it is not only she who is being tested, it is I, and I am failing." On July 7th, Louise found another set of pages beneath Marie-Claire's bed. They were wet again. The words written there were not in French. The priest, shown them, paled. Though he did not speak it fluently, he recognized Latin. Broken, distorted, but Latin nonetheless. The phrases repeated, "Non exeat, non exeat, non exeat." "It will not leave, it will not leave, it will not leave." He folded the pages carefully, locked them in his chest at the rectory, and told no one. But from that day onward he avoided looking directly into the girl's eyes. The following week, the villagers decided for themselves that something must be done. Word reached Etienne through a neighbor that several men had gathered at the tavern, speaking openly of driving the family from their land, or worse. That evening, Etienne begged the priest, "If you cannot save her, at least protect her, for they will come." Beauchesne hesitated, torn between obedience to his church and loyalty to his parishioners. He promised nothing. But that night, alone in the rectory, he lit another candle and opened his breviary to the rites he was forbidden to use. He traced the words with trembling fingers, and in the silence of the room he thought he heard a faint laugh, rising not from the girl's house, but from within his own walls. The faint laugh that Father Beauchesne heard in the rectory clung to him long after the sound had faded. He searched the room by candlelight, opening cupboards, peering behind the small altar table, even kneeling to press his ear against the floorboards. But there was nothing, only silence. When dawn broke, he tried to convince himself it had been his imagination, the echo of his own fear. Yet when he opened his breviary to continue reading, he found the margins smeared with dampness, as though the pages had been handled with wet hands. He knew he had left it dry the night before. Meanwhile, the Duval family endured their isolation in growing terror. Neighbors no longer passed their fields. At the market, no one sold to them unless Etienne paid double. A group of children hurled stones at Jean, bruising her shoulder. When Louise confronted the mothers, they turned their backs without a word. On July 10th, a dead rooster was found nailed to the family's fence, wings outstretched as though crucified. Etienne buried it quickly, saying nothing to his daughters. But Marie-Claire, pale and silent, watched the burial from the window. When he returned to the house, she said in a low voice, "They think the blood is theirs to spill, but it is mine." Louise struck her across the cheek, more from fear than anger. It was the first time she had ever laid a hand on her daughter. That same day, a delegation of villagers approached Beauchesne at the rectory. 3 men, led by the cooper, Bernard Lavigne, stood at his door. Their faces were stern, their voices sharp. "We will not allow this any longer," Lavigne declared. "The girl brings sickness. Livestock fails near their fields. Children cry at night. If the church will not act, the village will." The priest protested, insisting that the matter was one of illness and prayer, not violence. But the men were unmoved. They gave him a week. "If she is not gone by then," Lavigne said, "we will take matters into our own hands." When they left, Beauchesne sat alone, trembling. He understood their intent. They would drive the family out or kill the girl. That evening he went to the Duvals once more. He told Etienne and Louise what had been said. Louise wept openly. Etienne stared at the floor, silent. "They will not harm her," the priest insisted, though he did not believe it. I will not allow it. Yet, he had no clear plan. That night, as the family huddled together, Marie-Claire began to hum. It was a tune none recognized, slow, unsettling, rising and falling in uneven measures. The sound seemed to fill the small house until Jean covered her ears. When asked what she sang, she answered simply, "It is for when they come. I want them to hear it." The following days deepened the crisis. Marie-Claire's body weakened further. She could barely stand without support. Yet at night, her strength returned in bursts that terrified the others. On July 13th, Jeanne swore she saw her sister kneeling on her bed, not lying, not sitting, but kneeling perfectly still in the dark, her face turned to the wall. When she whispered her name, Marie-Claire replied without moving, "Do not wake me. He is teaching me." The next morning, soot covered her hands, though the hearth had not been used. Beauchesne, desperate, began preparations in secret. He gathered salt, holy water, and his crucifix. He copied passages from the forbidden rite of exorcism into a small notebook, tucking it beneath his cassock. He knew that if discovered, he would face censure, perhaps expulsion. Yet he no longer cared. On July 14th, he entered the Duval home and announced quietly, "We will begin tonight." The family agreed without hesitation. They were beyond fear of the church. That night, as darkness settled, the priest placed the crucifix upon the table and lit 3 candles. The family knelt around Marie-Claire, who sat pale and unresponsive in her chair. The priest began with psalms, his voice steady despite his trembling hands. He sprinkled holy water across the room, marking the doors and windows. For a moment, all seemed still. Then Marie-Claire's head jerked upward, her eyes opened wide, gleaming in the candlelight. Her lips parted, and in a voice that was not hers, she spoke. "Did you not hear me, priest? I said it will not leave." The candles flickered wildly, though no wind entered. Louise sobbed, clutching Jeanne and Marguerite to her. Etienne stood frozen. Beauchesne pressed on, raising the crucifix. He invoked the Trinity, his words shaking the walls with their force. Marie-Claire screamed, not with fear but with laughter, harsh, layered, echoing, the same as before in the church. Her body convulsed, her chair tipping until Etienne and the priest rushed to hold her down. She spat a black fluid onto the floor, thick and foul-smelling. It hissed when it touched the stone, leaving a faint mark. The priest recoiled, but did not stop. He pressed the crucifix against her forehead. She shrieked, her body arching, her arms thrashing with unnatural strength. Then suddenly she went limp. The house fell silent. The priest lowered the crucifix, panting. Etienne and Louise looked to him with desperate hope. But as he leaned close to check her breath, her eyes snapped open. She whispered so softly that only he could hear, "You are mine now." And the candle nearest him guttered out. That night Beauchesne did not return to the rectory. He remained in the Duval home until dawn, praying silently at her bedside. He could not sleep. He could not eat. His hands shook constantly. When morning came, he knew the truth. The villagers' deadline was 2 days away, and he no longer knew if he feared them or her more. By the morning of July 15th, the weight of time pressed on every soul in the Duval cottage. The villagers' ultimatum hung like a noose. 2 days remained. Etienne worked the fields alone, though few crops had taken. Louise scarcely left her daughter's side, her face drawn and pale. Jeanne and Marguerite rarely spoke except in whispers. Marie-Claire, though weak, lay eerily calm. She stared often at the ceiling beams, her lips moving as though in silent conversation. When asked what she said, she replied, "I am listening." Father Beauchesne had not returned to the rectory since the failed attempt. He remained in the cottage, unable to leave. The villagers noticed his absence, and their suspicion grew sharper. Bernard Lavigne was overheard at the tavern saying, "If the priest stands with the witch, then he is no priest of God." That same night, a group of men marched to the rectory, pounding on its door. Finding it empty, they broke the lock and entered. Beauchesne's belongings were tossed into the street. The breviary, his vestments, even the small notebook in which he had copied parts of the forbidden rite. Someone set fire to it, though the pages smoked without catching fully. Children stomped the ashes into the dirt. When word of this reached him the next morning, he sat silently in the Duval kitchen, his face ashen. Etienne asked what would come next. The priest answered, "They will not wait for the week to end. They will come sooner." On the night of July 16th, the family barred the doors with heavy wood. Etienne kept his scythe close. The daughters huddled near their mother. Father Beauchesne prayed aloud, though his voice wavered with every creak of the house. It was near midnight when Marie-Claire began to stir. She sat up suddenly, her eyes wide and gleaming in the candlelight. She laughed softly, almost like a child at play, and said, "They are coming now." Everyone froze. Etienne pressed his ear to the door, but no sound came from outside. Louise begged her daughter to lie down, but she would not. Instead, she whispered, "I will show you." And then she began to speak names. One by one, the names of the men who had gathered at the tavern. Bernard Lavigne, Henri Fournier, Jacques Delorme. Each name uttered clearly, her gaze fixed on the door. Moments later, a sound broke the silence. Footsteps in the distance, then voices, hushed but angry. The family stiffened. Etienne gripped his scythe until his knuckles whitened. The priest rose, trembling, holding the crucifix in front of him. But Marie-Claire only smiled. The voices outside grew louder. A fist pounded on the door. "Bring her out!" a man shouted. "We will not wait for more curses!" Etienne shouted back, refusing. The men cursed, demanding again. Then came the sound of wood splitting as they rammed against the door. The daughters screamed. Louise clutched them to her chest. The priest, caught between his duty to protect and his vow of obedience, shouted, "Leave this place, this is God's house now." His voice cracked but carried through the door. For a moment the pounding ceased. The men muttered among themselves, and then from inside the cottage a laugh broke out, Marie-Claire's layered, echoing laugh. It filled the house, bled into the night air, and silenced the voices outside. The men froze. One whispered, "Mother of God." Another spat and muttered, "It is true." Then hurried footsteps retreated into the darkness. Inside, the family sat in stunned silence. The door remained intact, though splintered. Etienne lowered the scythe. Louise collapsed to her knees. Father Beauchesne clutched his crucifix with both hands, whispering prayers not from the breviary but from memory, his voice breaking. Marie-Claire lay back on her bed, her face pale but peaceful. She whispered one last thing before sleep claimed her. "They will not harm me. He will not allow it." The following morning, July 17th, the village square was alive with unrest. Some swore they had heard the laughter from as far as the river. Others claimed shadows had moved across the fields, though the moon had been hidden. Fear divided the people. Some wanted to act immediately, others now hesitated. But the Duvals were marked beyond redemption. Women crossed themselves when Jean and Marguerite passed. At market no one would speak to them. A dead goat was left at the edge of their land, throat slit, eyes wide. The family began to consider fleeing. Louise begged her husband to take them to Rouen, or anywhere beyond these fields. Etienne shook his head, weary. "We have nothing left," he said. "No coin, no horse, no kin. If we leave, we starve." And still, Marie-Claire worsened. She slept for long stretches, waking only to mutter in Latin or scribble with shaking hands. New damp pages appeared each night. The priest no longer burned them. Instead, he collected them in a small satchel, though he dared not read them all. One, however, he could not ignore. It bore only a single sentence, repeated across the page: "She will die on the feast of St. Anne." The feast fell on July 26th, 10 days away. The words on the page haunted Father Beauchesne. "She will die on the feast of St. Anne." He folded the sheet and hid it in his satchel, but the words etched themselves into his mind. Every time he looked at Marie-Claire, pale and trembling beneath her blankets, he imagined her breath ceasing on that day, July 26th. He did not tell the family at once, but Louise sensed his unease. "You have read something," she pressed, gripping his arm. "Tell me." He hesitated, then said only, "There is mention of a date. We must prepare with prayer." Her face fell. "So it is decided already?" "No," he insisted, though his own voice betrayed his doubt. "Prophecies are snares. They feed despair. We will not yield to it." But when he turned away, he crossed himself twice, as though once was not enough. The village, meanwhile, grew more fractured. After the failed attempt to storm the cottage, fear outweighed anger, for the moment. Some avoided the Duval fields altogether. Others whispered that the girl had bewitched the men into retreat. Rumors spread that she could see names, that she knew secrets whispered in the dark. On July 18th, Bernard Lavigne confronted Father Beauchesne publicly outside the church. "You protect her still," he spat. "You endanger us all. If she dies in that house, her curse will remain." The priest replied firmly, "She is a soul in torment, not a witch. You speak of curses, but it is your hatred that damns you." But even as he spoke, his confidence faltered. He felt the villagers' eyes on him, accusing, suspicious. He knew his position was slipping beyond repair. Inside the Duval cottage, the days stretched long and heavy. Marie-Claire's body weakened further, yet her presence seemed larger, heavier, as if her frailty only deepened the oppression in the air. Jeanne and Marguerite rarely slept, afraid of what they might hear at night. On July 19th, Louise woke screaming. She claimed she had seen a figure at the foot of her bed, tall, shadowed, its hands resting on her daughter's blanket. When the priest asked what face it bore, she whispered, "None, only darkness." That morning, another damp page appeared beneath the girl's pillow. This time the words were in French, written in the same jagged hand. "The priest belongs to me. He will kneel before I take her." Beauchesne read it in silence, then burned it quickly in the hearth. But the smoke that rose smelled not of paper, but of sulfur. On July 20th, Etienne returned from the fields shaken. He had found a group of men gathered near the boundary stones, speaking in low voices. When he approached, they dispersed, but he overheard one mutter, "If the priest fails, the earth must drink." That night, Etienne confessed to his wife, "If they come again, I will not let them take her alive. Better we keep her here than let them drag her like an animal." His voice broke as he said it, but his grip on the scythe never loosened. The priest, tormented by his own impotence, considered once more writing to the bishop, but the last letter had brought no reply. To wait for an answer now, with St. Anne's feast approaching, felt like surrender. So he made a decision. On July 21st, he began to prepare not merely prayers, but the full rite of exorcism. He copied the passages again carefully into his notebook. He practiced them aloud in the rectory, though his voice cracked. Each time, he felt a presence in the room, as if the very walls pressed closer. In his journal that evening he wrote, "I no longer seek permission. If this is my sin, I will answer for it in eternity. But if I do nothing, her blood will be upon me." On July 22nd, another manifestation shook the family. At midday, as Louise prepared bread, every dish in the cupboard fell at once, crashing to the floor. No one had touched them. The noise rang through the house, and when they rushed in, they found Marie-Claire laughing softly, though she had not left her bed. Later that night, Etienne discovered a new message scrawled into the wall above her bed, etched as though by a blade. 4 days remain. The letters were carved deep, their edges blackened. The priest doubled his prayers. He fasted, drank only water, and spent hours on his knees. His eyes grew hollow, his skin gaunt. Yet doubt gnawed at him. He feared the prophecy was not merely The clock in the cottage struck midnight, its sound hollow and uneven, as though the pendulum struggled against an unseen weight. The family gathered in the main room, Louise with her rosary clutched so tightly the beads cut into her palm, Etienne with his scythe resting across his knees, and the daughters pressed against their mother wide-eyed, trembling. In the center of the room lay Marie-Claire, stretched upon a straw mattress brought in from her bedchamber. She was thinner than ever, her skin pale, her lips cracked, her breathing shallow. Yet when her eyes opened, their dark gleam held a mocking awareness. Father Beauchesne stood over her, crucifix in one hand, holy water in the other. His voice shook at first, but grew steadier as he spoke. In the name of the Father and of the Son and of the Holy Spirit. Marie-Claire's back arched violently, her limbs jerking as though pulled by invisible strings. A guttural laugh erupted from her throat, so unlike her own that Marguerite screamed. The priest pressed forward. "Depart, unclean spirit, in the name of Christ Jesus." The temperature in the room plummeted. The fire in the hearth sputtered and died, though no wind had touched it. The crucifix in Beauchesne's hand grew cold, biting against his skin. Marie-Claire's eyes rolled upward, showing only whites. Her mouth opened, and a voice emerged, deep, resonant, layered, as though several spoke at once. "She belongs to me. Your prayers are ash," Louise cried out, dropping to her knees. "Mother of God, protect us." Beauchesne poured holy water onto the girl's forehead. She shrieked, thrashing so violently that Etienne and Louise had to hold her arms down. Steam rose where the drops touched her skin, though she bore no burns. The priest's voice broke, but did not stop. "I adjure you, spirit of darkness, by him who cast you from heaven, leave this child of God." The walls groaned as if the cottage itself resisted. A crack snaked up one corner, dust sifting down. Jeanne clutched her sister, sobbing. Marie-Claire suddenly stilled. Her lips parted, and in a small, almost tender voice she whispered, "Papa?" Etienne froze. The sound was her own, weak, frightened, his little girl again. His grip faltered. Beauchesne shouted, "Do not listen! It is deceit!" But it was too late. Marie-Claire turned her head, her eyes wet, and pleaded, "Papa, it hurts. Help me." Etienne leaned closer, trembling. "I am here, my child." Her face twisted. With a snarl, she spat into his eyes. The saliva stung, burning like acid. Etienne cried out, stumbling back, clutching his face. The daughters screamed. The demon's laughter roared through the room. Beauchesne raised his voice above the chaos, chanting the Latin prayers with desperate force. "Exorcizo te omnis spiritus immunde." I cast you out, every unclean spirit. Marie-Claire convulsed, her body bending at angles unnatural for a frail frame. Her jaw snapped open wider than humanly possible, as though something within pressed to emerge. A foul odor filled the room, rot, sulfur, damp earth. Louise gagged, tears streaming down her face, but she did not release her daughter's arm. Then, suddenly, Marie-Claire spoke again, this time in French, her tone soft, almost sing-song. 4 days. I warned you. You are too late." The priest felt his resolve waver. The prophecy, the date, the feast day was upon them. Was he already defeated? He slammed the crucifix against her chest. "In the name of Christ you shall not take her." A piercing shriek erupted, so loud it rattled the shutters. The glass of the lone window cracked, a jagged line splitting through it. Marie-Claire's body shook violently, and then she collapsed, motionless, her chest barely rising. For a moment, silence fell. Louise sobbed with relief. "It is over. Surely it is over." But Beauchesne did not lower the crucifix. He knew better. The silence was not victory. It was the pause before the storm. At that moment, Etienne, still blinded by burning eyes, stumbled toward the wall. With his hand he touched something wet. He pulled back his palm. It was smeared with ink, thick and black. On the plaster, fresh words had appeared, scrawled in jagged strokes. "Now you kneel." Before Beauchesne could react, a force struck him from behind. He fell hard to his knees, the crucifix slipping from his grasp. His body bowed forward, pressed down by something unseen. Louise screamed. The children clung to her skirts. Etienne, half-blind, groped for his scythe. Marie-Claire's eyes fluttered open once more. But now they glowed faintly, like embers in a dying fire. And in a voice not her own, she whispered, "The priest is mine." The weight that forced Father Beauchesne to his knees felt not merely physical but spiritual, an invisible hand pressing down on his very soul. His chest heaved as though the air had thickened into water. He tried to lift the crucifix again, but his arm trembled, paralyzed at the elbow. Marie-Claire's body did not move, yet her lips curved into a faint, unnatural smile, her ember-lit eyes fixed on him, unblinking. "You pray, but you do not believe," she said in that layered, unnatural voice. "Your faith was ashes before I touched you." The words struck deep, not for their blasphemy, but for the way they echoed his private doubts. Beauchesne's hands shook. For years he had questioned why God allowed suffering, why prayers went unanswered. The voice dredged every buried weakness into the open. "Silence," he rasped, though his own conviction faltered. Louise crawled to the priest's side, gripping his sleeve. "You must continue, please. She will die without you." But Beauchesne could hardly lift his head, his throat constricted, his lips refusing the next words of the rite. Sweat poured down his face, despite the bitter chill that gripped the cottage. Etienne stumbled forward, his eyes bloodshot and watering, still smarting from the burn. He pressed his scythe into the floor, using it to steady himself. "If you cannot fight, then I will," he growled, though he did not know what he meant by it. At his words, Marie-Claire's head snapped toward him with unnatural speed. The smile widened. "Father against daughter. I can make it so." Her voice softened, imitating his daughter's childhood lilt. "Papa, come play with me in the fields." Etienne staggered back as if struck, his grip on the scythe faltering. The daughter shrieked as the fireless hearth suddenly hissed and spat. A thin trail of smoke rose from the blackened wood, though no flame touched it. On the mantel, the wooden crucifix Louise had hung began to tilt slowly, as though pushed by invisible fingers. Jeanne clung to Marguerite, whispering prayers they could barely remember. Louise seized Beauchesne's crucifix, lifting it herself, though her hands shook violently. She pressed it against her daughter's forehead. "In Christ's name, leave her." Marie-Claire's skin hissed under the contact, her body convulsing. But the laugh returned, low and mocking. "A mother's love is the sweetest knife. She would bleed for her child, yes. But would she kill for her?" Louise jerked the crucifix back, horrified, as though the suggestion itself had tainted her. Beauchesne forced his breath into steady rhythm, willing strength back into his limbs. He reached for the satchel at his side, the one filled with the damp, impossible pages. With shaking fingers, he pulled one free at random. The ink was smeared, but the words were legible. "He will bow before me, and when he rises, he will not be the same." The priest dropped the page, his heart hammering. The prophecy was no longer about Marie-Claire alone. He snatched his crucifix from Louise's hand, pressing it tight until the edges cut into his palm. With a hoarse cry, he forced the rite back into his lips. "In the name of the Immaculate Virgin, by the blood of Christ crucified, I command you, depart." Marie-Claire shrieked. The sound was like iron scraping stone, raw and endless. The shutters rattled, dust poured from the rafters. Her body jerked upward, though her parents held her down. Her spine arched, her heels digging into the mattress, her hands clawing at the air. For a moment the oppressive weight on Beauchesne lifted. He staggered to his feet, drenched in sweat but unbroken. Yet the victory was fleeting. The girl's mouth twisted, lips torn from the strain, and she spat new words with venom. "You wear his cloth, but you dream of sin. I know her name. I know what you did." Beauchesne froze. No one in the room understood, but he did. He had thought that secret buried, one foolish night of weakness in seminary, a desire he had never confessed. The demon's voice laid it bare. His crucifix wavered, his lips faltered. Louise cried, "Do not stop, Father!" But the voice pressed harder, relentless. "You confess others. Who absolves you?" The words burrowed deeper than any wound. He staggered back, nearly dropping the crucifix again. And then, Marie-Claire gasped. Her body convulsed violently, more violently than before. Foam gathered at her lips. Her wrists thrashed so hard, Louise feared her bones might snap. The laughter ceased. Her eyes rolled back. For the first time in weeks, she screamed in her own voice, "Help me, please, I don't want to die." The family froze, stunned. It was her, truly her. No mimicry, no distortion. Marie-Claire. Beauchesne's heart clenched. He rushed forward, pressing the crucifix to her chest, shouting the prayers with renewed fervor. "Hold fast, child. Hold fast to him." Her hands clawed at his cassock, desperate, human, terrified. "Save me!" Etienne sobbed, gripping her shoulders. Louise kissed her daughter's hair, tears streaming. The daughters clung to her legs, whispering, "It's her, Mama, it's her." But the moment was fragile, too fragile. For even as she cried out, her mouth twisted again, her eyes darted upward, and the voice returned, layered, mocking, cold. "Did you think she would be spared?" The body went limp. And then, in a whisper that froze every soul in the room, 4 days was too generous. The feast begins tonight. The silence after the whisper was unbearable. Every member of the family stood motionless, their breathing ragged, as though afraid the slightest sound might call the thing forth again. The fire had long since died, yet the room seemed to glow faintly, lit by no candle or lamp. Marie-Claire's body lay limp on the mattress, her chest rising shallowly, her lips parted. Louise stroked her daughter's hair, whispering prayers through trembling lips. Etienne stood watch with his scythe, his face streaked with sweat and soot, though his eyes betrayed exhaustion more than fury. Father Beauchesne had retreated into the shadows of the cottage corner, clutching his crucifix, his knuckles white. The last word still rang in his head. "The feast begins tonight." He had not spoken of it aloud, but he knew what it meant. Tonight was the vigil of Saint Anne. The demon had not erred in its timing. It had simply shifted the terms. The first sound came at the shutters, a faint scratching like claws against wood. Marguerite gasped, covering her ears. Etienne spun toward the sound, raising the scythe. Then came another, at the opposite side of the cottage, and another, higher up, near the roof beams. A dozen small scratches all at once, as though vermin swarmed across the walls. Louise pressed her daughters close, whispering, "It is only rats, nothing more." But her own voice faltered. The sound was too steady, too deliberate. From the rafters above, dust drifted down, fine and grey. Jeanne pointed upward, her face pale. "Mama, look!" Dark streaks spread slowly along the ceiling beams, damp as though water seeped through. But the roof had not leaked in years. The smell that followed was unmistakable. Blood and iron. Father Beauchesne forced himself forward, voice hoarse but steady. "This house is consecrated. By the authority of Christ no spirit may enter." At his words the scratching ceased. Silence pressed down again. And then came the knock. 1, 2, 3, measured, deliberate, on the barred front door. Etienne gripped his scythe tighter, every muscle taut. "If they've come for her," Beauchesne raised a hand, "it is not the villagers." The knock came again, slow, patient. Louise began to weep. The priest approached the door, crucifix lifted. He did not unbar it, but pressed his ear against the wood. A voice whispered from the other side, faint, female, trembling. "Father, it is Sister Geneviève. Please open. I was sent from Rouen." Beauchesne froze. Sister Geneviève was real. A nun he had known years before in seminary, who had gone on to serve at the hospital in Rouen. He whispered back, "What proof have you? Speak a psalm." The voice answered at once, "The Lord is my shepherd. I shall not want." Her tone cracked on the final word, but it was unmistakably her. Louise gasped, "It is help. Open the door." Beauchesne's hand trembled on the bar. He longed to believe it, but his training, his fear, held him back. "No one from Rouen could have come in a single night," he said. Silence followed. And then the voice changed. The same mouth, the same lips. But now it was Etienne's voice that spoke. "Open, or I will cut them all down." The daughters shrieked. Louise screamed. Etienne himself stumbled backward in horror. The knock resumed, harder, faster. The door shuddered in its frame. Marie-Claire stirred, her head lifted, eyes half-lidded, voice weak but clear. "They are hungry," she whispered. Beauchesne turned toward her, heart pounding. Who waits outside?" Her lips curved faintly. "All of them." At once, the barred door bent inward, wood cracking. The hinges groaned as though wrenched from both sides. Etienne lunged, throwing his weight against it, holding it firm. The scratching returned, now louder, from every wall, every shutter. It was not rats. It was fingers, nails scraping wood, hundreds of them. Jeanne fainted into her mother's arms. Marguerite screamed until her throat gave out. Louise could only clutch them, rocking, eyes shut tight. The priest shouted above the chaos, voice raw with desperation. "Saint Michael the Archangel, defend us in battle. Be our protection against the wickedness and snares of the devil." The door ceased shaking. The scratching stopped. The cottage fell into silence again, but silence had never felt so unsafe. Beauchesne staggered back, breath ragged. Etienne slumped against the door, drenched in sweat, his face pale. Louise whispered prayers, her voice hoarse. Marie-Claire lay still once more, her lips barely moving. Beauchesne knelt close, straining to hear. Her words were almost too faint to catch, but he heard them. "You cannot keep them out forever." And then her eyes opened, glowing faintly again, and she whispered, louder this time, "Tonight, the feast begins inside." The air in the cottage thickened, as though every breath dragged smoke into the lungs. Father Beauchesne pressed a trembling hand against the crucifix at his chest, whispering fragments of Latin prayers he could barely recall. He had faced confessions of murder, of theft, of infidelity, but never this. Never a house that felt alive with malice. The family huddled together. Louise clutched Jean and Marguerite so tightly that her arms trembled from the strain. Etienne still pressed his weight against the door, his scythe at his side, though no one knocked now. From the mattress, Marie-Claire's body convulsed once, then stilled. Her eyes fluttered open. She looked straight at Beauchesne, and this time her voice was clear, without distortion, without mockery, like a simple fact spoken aloud. "It is already here." The walls answered her. A groan rippled through the cottage timbers, low and resonant. The floorboards shifted beneath their feet, though no one moved. Dust sifted down from the rafters like falling ash. Jeanne whimpered, "Mama, it's in the house. It's inside." Louise hushed her, but her own voice shook. Then, faintly, a sound came from the kitchen corner. A dripping. Etienne turned his head, wary. The family's single clay water jug sat upright on the table. But the dripping continued, steady, unnatural. Beauchesne approached. His candle's flame quivered, though no draught touched it. He held the light over the table. A thin, black liquid seeped from beneath the jug, pooling across the wood. The smell struck first: iron, rot, earth, blood. Louise gagged. "It cannot be." The jug cracked suddenly with a sharp report, splitting down its side. From the fissure, more of the dark fluid gushed, spilling to the floor, coating the boards. The dripping grew louder, as though from every corner of the room at once. Marguerite shrieked and pointed to the ceiling. From the beams, dark rivulets spread, dripping down the plastered walls. The black liquid coursed in thin lines, spelling jagged shapes before running together. Words formed, letters crooked and slanted. Eat. Drink. Feast. Etienne tore Jeanne and Marguerite away from the wall, shielding their eyes. Louise fell to her knees, pressing her forehead against the floor, sobbing prayers. Father Beauchesne forced the crucifix high, his voice breaking as he shouted, "The Lord rebuke you! This house is not your table!" The dripping ceased at once. The black streaks on the wall halted mid-run, frozen like hardened tar. But silence did not return. Instead, a low murmur began. a chorus of whispers, overlapping, circling the cottage like a swarm. Too many voices to count, too faint to discern, the daughters screamed, pressing their hands to their ears. Etienne shouted for it to stop. Louise clutched the crucifix chain around her neck so tightly the metal cut into her skin. Beauchesne stepped into the center of the room, turning in slow circles, crucifix raised. "In the name of Jesus Christ, be gone," he cried. The whispers fell silent, and then, from Marie-Claire's throat, came a sound none of them had ever heard before, guttural, wet, as though her lungs filled with mud. Her chest heaved, her ribs straining, until with a violent cough she expelled a mouthful of the same black liquid that dripped from the walls. It splattered across the floorboards. The smell of decay filled the room. Louise screamed and reached for her, but Beauchesne held her back. "Do not touch it." Marie-Claire collapsed back onto the mattress, trembling, eyes wide and shining. For a moment, she looked like a frightened child again. "Mama," she whispered weakly, "I'm so hungry." The words chilled them more than the shrieks had. Louise sobbed, rocking back and forth. Etienne muttered prayers through clenched teeth. Beauchesne knelt beside the girl, holding the crucifix near her lips. "You shall not eat of them," he whispered. "Not in this house." Her gaze shifted to him, pupils dilating, and in a voice layered and cold she answered, "Then you will starve with her." The candle flame guttered and went out. Darkness swallowed the cottage. For several heartbeats, none of them moved. Only the stench of rot, the faint tremor of whispers just beyond hearing, and the sound of Marie-Claire's ragged breathing filled the blackness. And then, in the dark, something new began. The sound of chewing, slow, deliberate, coming from nowhere and everywhere at once. The feast had begun. The sound gnawed at them, wet, steady chewing. It carried from the rafters, from the dark corners, even from beneath the floorboards. Each bite dragged across their nerves, until the very thought of food felt obscene. Louise clamped her hands over her ears, rocking. "Make it stop, please, father, make it stop." Etienne, pale but furious, brandished his scythe blindly in the dark. "Show yourself, devil! You feed on nothing!" But the chewing only grew louder, joined by gulps, something swallowing, savoring. Jeanne wailed, clinging to Marguerite. "Papa, it's eating her, it's eating Marie-Claire!" At once Beauchesne struck flint to steel. The candle sputtered back to life. The sight froze them. Marie-Claire sat upright on the mattress, though no one had helped her. Her face was slick with the black fluid she had vomited. It smeared her mouth and chin, glistening in the candlelight. Her lips moved with the sound of chewing, though nothing was in her mouth. Louise cried out, trying to rush forward, but Beauchesne seized her arm. "Stay back!" Marie-Claire's eyes darted to him. She smiled. Her teeth were no longer white. They glistened dark, as though coated in ink or blood. "Don't you see?" she whispered. "They've already brought the table. They've already set the meal." Etienne bellowed and charged, scythe raised. But as he swung toward the mattress, the air itself thickened, halting his strike as though he had cut through water. He staggered, dropping to one knee. The chewing escalated, hundreds of mouths now, layered and overlapping. From the beams above, dust rained down. The very roof seemed to creak under the weight of unseen bodies. Marguerite pointed to the wall. Her voice broke into a shriek. "Papa, look!" The black rivulets that had hardened before now softened, running again. They thickened into shapes, not letters this time, but crude forms of hands. Dozens of them. They reached downward, stretching across the wall as though clawing for entry. Louise buried her face in her skirt. Etienne stumbled back, his scythe useless in his trembling hands. Beauchesne gripped the crucifix tighter and began to pray aloud, louder than he ever had at Mass. "Deliver us, O Lord, from every evil. Defend us from the snares of the devil. Let your holy light—" The chewing stopped. For a moment silence returned, so sudden it roared in their ears. Even Marie-Claire ceased her grisly mimicry. Her mouth closed, her head tilted. She looked at Beauchesne with something close to pity. "Father," she whispered, her voice faint and human again, "why do you pray to a God who has already left this place?" The words struck him harder than any physical blow. Louise sobbed harder. Etienne clenched his jaw, whispering through his teeth. Lies. All lies. But Marie-Claire smiled, and her voice shifted again, layered with something deeper, guttural. He does not sit at this table. We do. A gust of foul air swept through the cottage, extinguishing the candle once more. The darkness returned, this time alive with movement. Small, scurrying shapes darted across the floorboards, unseen but felt. The children shrieked as tiny claws brushed their ankles. The chewing resumed. Closer now, right beside them. Beauchesne raised the crucifix blindly, forcing his voice against the terror. In the name of Christ, I command you, depart this house. From the darkness came a laugh, shrill and fractured. It did not belong to Marie-Claire. It echoed from the rafters, the walls, the earth itself. And then the chewing turned to tearing, ripping sounds, flesh and sinew. Louise screamed. Etienne swung the scythe wildly, striking only wood. But Beauchesne froze, for he realized with dawning horror that the sounds did not come from the air. They came from within, from Marie-Claire's body. Her belly swelled against her dress, writhing as though something inside fed hungrily. She clawed at her own stomach, shrieking in pain, her voice breaking between her own and the layered tones of the intruder. "Stop them," she begged. "They're eating me alive." The priest lunged forward, pressing the crucifix against her forehead. The metal sizzled, smoke rising, though the fire was not his. Her eyes rolled white, her body arched. And then, from deep within her chest, a voice erupted, harsh, guttural, unlike any human tongue. "The feast is ours." The walls shuddered, the roof groaned, and outside, for the first time since the horror began, the dogs howled again, long, mournful, and terrified. The crucifix burned against Marie-Claire's forehead, though no flame touched it. Smoke coiled upward, bitter and acrid, carrying the stench of scorched hair. She convulsed, eyes rolled back, lips foaming with the same black ichor that had stained her bed. "Father," Etienne shouted, gripping the scythe with both hands but frozen in place. Beauchesne pressed harder, his voice straining. "In the name of Jesus Christ, Son of the living God, depart. You are not welcome here." Marie-Claire's back arched so violently that her body lifted off the mattress. Her limbs trembled, rattling against the wooden frame, until one wrist snapped against the post with a sickening crack. Louise shrieked and tried to lunge forward, but Marguerite clung to her mother's skirts, sobbing. The guttural voice came again, not from her lips, but from deep within her chest. "You speak to shadows. The Master does not hear you." Her body slammed back onto the mattress. The frame split, wood splintering beneath her weight. Beauchesne staggered backward, gasping. The crucifix in his hand had grown warm, as though the metal resisted his grip. For a moment, he feared dropping it altogether. The house itself seemed to groan with the effort of resisting his prayer. The beams creaked overhead, the shutters clapped violently against the windows, and beneath their feet, the packed earth floor shifted as though something burrowed just below the surface. Etienne roared, rushing forward. "Enough!" He raised the scythe to strike, not at the girl, but at the wall itself, where black rivulets had thickened into clawed hands. He swung with all his strength. The blade sank deep into the boards. At once the chewing stopped. The room fell into a suffocating silence, but then an answering crack. The wall behind Marie-Claire bulged outward, as though something pressed from within. The board split and black fluid oozed forth, glistening in the candlelight that Etienne had managed to relight. The stench that filled the room was unbearable, sour, rotting, like meat long buried. Louise gagged and turned away. Marguerite buried her face in her brother's chest. Beauchesne tightened his grip on the crucifix, summoning every shred of faith left in him. "Saint Michael the Archangel, defend us in battle. Be our protection against the wickedness and snares of the devil." Marie-Claire's eyes snapped open. She was conscious again, though her expression was alien. Her lips curled into a grin far too wide for her face. "Do you think he listens, Father?" she rasped. Her voice was hers and yet not hers, layered with something ancient. "He has abandoned you. That is why we feast. Beauchene's voice wavered. The words of the prayer faltered in his throat. A seed of doubt, small, insidious, slipped into his heart. The girl laughed, a hollow, rattling sound. Then she sat upright, unaided, her broken wrist dangling useless at her side. She leaned forward, speaking low enough that only he could hear. The journal was never hers, it was ours. You burned it, and yet it still drips. What is written cannot be undone. Beauchene recoiled, bile rising in his throat. He had told no one about the journal's condition after the fire. Not Etienne, not Louise, not anyone. How could she know? Etienne bellowed again and wrenched the scythe free from the wall. Black ichor sprayed outward like arterial blood. It splattered across the room, onto the priest's cassock, onto Louise's shawl, onto the children's skin. Where it touched, it burned, not with heat, but with cold. Marguerite screamed as it streaked her arm, leaving a welt of pale, puckered flesh. Louise rushed to her, scrubbing at the stain with her shawl, but the mark remained, raised and blistering. "Father, do something," she cried. Beauchene's voice shook, but he forced the words from his throat. "I adjure you, unclean spirit, depart from this child of God." Marie-Claire's body convulsed violently, slamming back against the broken bed frame. Her teeth clattered, as though chattering in the cold, though sweat poured down her temples. Her voice erupted again, this time guttural, screeching, "You have no claim here." The crucifix in Beauchene's hand seared hot. He clenched his jaw, refusing to drop it. He pressed forward until the holy symbol nearly touched her lips. She hissed, recoiling, her flesh blistering at the contact. The house shook. A beam cracked overhead, sending dust cascading down upon them. The shutters blew inward, smashing against the walls. A gust of icy wind extinguished the flame once more. They were plunged into darkness, save for the faint glow that now emanated from Marie-Claire's skin. Not light, not fire. Something else. A faint, phosphorescent shimmer, like the glow of rotting wood in a forest at night. The priest's heart pounded. Etienne stumbled back, muttering curses under his breath. Louise held her children close, rocking them as if they were infants again. Beauchene swallowed, lifted the crucifix higher, and began the words he had been trained to fear more than any others, words reserved for only the gravest cases. Exorcizo te, omnis immundus spiritus. The response was immediate. Marie-Claire's body convulsed so violently that her bones cracked audibly. Her mouth opened wider than humanly possible, and from her throat poured a sound that was not a scream, but a chorus of screams, hundreds, thousands, rising together until the walls themselves quivered. The floor beneath them rippled as if it were water. Marguerite and Jeanne shrieked, clutching their mother. Etienne stumbled, dropping the scythe with a clang. Beauchene shouted louder, forcing each Latin word through the roar. Omnis incursio adversari, omnis legio, omnis congregatio et secta diabolica. And then, silence again. Marie-Claire collapsed back onto the ruined bed, limp, her chest heaving. For the first time, her face softened. She looked almost herself again. Her lips parted. "Father," she whispered. Louise gasped, ready to rush to her side. But before anyone could move, Marie-Claire's eyes snapped open once more and she finished her own sentence. "Do you not know? The feast has only just begun." Her whisper cut through the room like a blade. "Do you not know? The feast has only just begun." The words clung to the silence that followed, heavier than the wind that still clawed at the shutters. Louise's sobs faltered. Etienne's grip on the scythe faltered. Beauchene stood rooted, crucifix raised, but his heart hammered with a terror he could not name. Marie-Claire lay on the bed, her chest rising and falling in shallow jerks. The phosphorescent glow that had shimmered across her skin dimmed, but did not vanish entirely. It lingered in her eyes, a faint, unnatural light. Then, without warning, the floor groaned beneath them. Etienne staggered. "Father, look!" The packed earth that served as the cottage floor began to crack, thin lines spreading outward from beneath the bed, as though something below sought release. The fissures widened, dust sifting upward. The children screamed. Louise gathered them against her body, shielding them with her shawl. Beauchesne forced his voice to rise above the chaos. "I command you, unclean spirit, by the authority of Christ, leave this vessel." Marie-Claire's lips curled, though her eyes remained glassy. She whispered back, almost tenderly, "Why command what has been invited?" Her words sent a chill through Beauchesne's spine. He remembered then the journal, the one she had kept in secret, the one her father burned, the one that still bled black fluid when he touched it. Invited. The cracks widened. A low rumble rose from beneath the floorboards. Etienne swung his scythe again, striking the earth as if he could cut the sound in half. But the ground only trembled harder, as though mocking his effort. From the fissures the stench returned, rot, wet soil, something older than the house itself. Louise gagged, pressing her face into her daughter's hair. "Father, please, make it stop." Beauchesne tightened his grip on the crucifix, sweat dripping from his brow. His Latin faltered, but he pressed on, his voice trembling. "In nomine Iesu Christi, exorcizo te, every legion, every congregation of the devil." The ground heaved. One fissure split wide, and a burst of icy wind shot upward, carrying with it a sound that froze them all. Chewing, the same wet mastication, but louder now, as if rising from a cavern beneath their feet. The children shrieked. Etienne dropped to one knee, covering his ears. Louise clutched them tighter, rocking in desperation. Beauchesne bellowed the words, his voice hoarse. "Begone, unclean spirit!" The light within Marie-Claire's eyes flared. She sat upright once more, her broken wrist dangling, her hair hanging wild. She leaned forward, speaking in a voice both hers and not hers, layered, ancient, commanding. "This house does not belong to you, it is ours. It has always been ours." The beams overhead cracked, dust rained down in thick showers. The shutters blew open with a thunderous crash, letting in the storm. The candle's flame guttered out. They were left in darkness, save for Marie-Claire's glowing eyes. Etienne roared and lunged, driving the scythe toward her chest. But before the blade could strike, the air itself seemed to harden. The scythe halted mid-swing, as though gripped by unseen hands. Etienne strained, veins bulging, but it would not move. Marie-Claire tilted her head, smiling faintly. "Hungry, father?" she asked. But she was not looking at Etienne. She was looking at Beauchesne. The priest's knees buckled. He fell forward, catching himself on the bed frame. The crucifix burned hotter in his palm until he thought it might brand his flesh. He pressed it against her again, forcing himself through the terror. "Deliver us, Lord, we pray, from the power of Satan, from the darkness of his kingdom," Marie-Claire shrieked. Her body thrashed, striking the bed frame so hard it splintered further. Her jaw unhinged, opening wider than bone should allow. From her throat came not vomit this time, but a torrent of black water, cold, reeking, pouring across the bed and onto the floor. It spread in every direction, soaking the earth until it shimmered like a black mirror. The chewing grew louder, echoing from the water itself. Marguerite screamed, clinging to her mother. Jeanne wept silently, her small hands clutching Louise's shawl. Etienne staggered backward, his boots sinking into the spreading fluid. He pulled them free with a wet squelch, his face twisted in horror. Beauchesne lifted the crucifix high. His voice cracked, but he forced the prayer out in Latin. "Exorcizo te omnis immundus spiritus, in nomine Dei Patris Omnipotentis." The glow in Marie-Claire's eyes flared once more. Her voice rose, deafening, filled with layers upon layers of tones. "Hear us, then. Hear our feast." The house quaked. The black water rippled, and in its surface reflections appeared, faces that did not belong to anyone in the room. Hollow-eyed, hollow-mouthed, their jaws working ceaselessly as they chewed. Louise screamed, covering her children's eyes. Etienne stumbled, striking at the water with his scythe, but the faces only multiplied. Beauchesne's heart pounded. His faith faltered, doubt gnawed. He had been taught that God's light was stronger than any darkness, but the darkness here was not receding, it was growing. The priest closed his eyes and shouted the words anyway, forcing them into the storm, into the chewing, into the voices. Per Christum Dominum Nostrum. For a heartbeat, silence returned. Marie-Claire collapsed backward, her body slack, her eyes fluttering closed. The glow faded. The chewing ceased. The water stilled. Only the storm outside remained. Louise wept in relief, clutching her daughters. Etienne fell to his knees, crossing himself over and over. Beauchesne staggered backward, the crucifix slipping from his trembling hand. His cassock clung to his body with sweat. His chest heaved. Marie-Claire lay motionless, her breathing faint but steady. For the first time in days, she looked at peace. The priest fell to his knees, whispering hoarsely, "Thank God, thank God." But then, so faint it might have been imagined, a sound stirred again, not chewing this time, lapping, like water against the edges of a shore. Beauchesne froze. His eyes darted downward. The black fluid still covered the earth floor, and though it appeared still, the sound persisted, gentle, steady, as though the feast was only resting. The lapping did not cease. Even as Marie-Claire's chest rose and fell with the fragile rhythm of life, even as Louise rocked her daughters in trembling relief, that sound persisted, water brushing against an unseen shore. Beauchesne knelt in the muck, staring at the black film that coated the earth floor. To the eye it seemed still, as though the flood had stilled into a slick stain, but to the ear it betrayed itself. It was moving, breathing, waiting. His lips trembled over the words of a prayer he could not finish. The crucifix lay in his lap, cool once more, yet he could not bring himself to lift it. Etienne's voice shattered the silence. "Is it over?" He rose unsteadily, boots sloshing. The scythe hung limp in his hand, his knuckles raw from gripping it. His eyes darted to the priest. "Tell me, Father, it's done, isn't it?" Beauchesne looked at Marie-Claire. Her body, pale and damp, lay crumpled on the splintered bed frame. One wrist bent unnaturally, her lips were cracked and bloodied, but her breathing was steady, almost too steady, like a rhythm rehearsed, not lived. He swallowed. For now. Louise let out a sob, clutching Jean and Marguerite tighter. "God be praised," she whispered. "She is herself again." But Beauchesne's silence said otherwise. By dawn, the storm outside had broken. The air hung heavy with rain and rot. The cottage smelled of damp earth, sweat, and something darker that clung even after windows were thrown open. They had moved Marie-Claire to the hearth, laying her on blankets while Etienne and Louise scrubbed at the blackened floor. Yet no matter how fiercely they scraped with rags and water, the stain remained. Louise rubbed until her palms blistered. "It won't lift," she whispered. Beauchesne sat at the table, head in his hands, the crucifix resting on the wood before him. His cassock was stiff with dried ichor, and his lips were cracked from prayers spoken until his voice had broken. Etienne slammed the rag into the bucket, splashing filthy water onto the boards. If the church had sent help sooner, if they had listened, this wouldn't have fallen to us alone. His voice shook with rage. "We are peasants, not priests." Beauchesne raised his eyes, hollow with exhaustion. "They will not send another. I wrote to the bishop in Poitiers. His reply arrived yesterday." He gestured weakly toward a folded letter on the table, still sealed with wax. Louise looked up, fear etched into her face. "And what did he say?" Beauchesne hesitated. Then, with trembling fingers, he pushed the letter across the table. Etienne tore it open, eyes scanning the lines. His face hardened with every word. Finally, he spat. "They say she is ill, that it is no demon, but a madness of the mind. They say our superstition is the greater evil." Louise gasped, covering her mouth. Beauchesne closed his eyes, his voice hoarse. "They will not grant sanction. They say to confine her, to pray quietly, to accept what comes." Etienne's fist struck the table, rattling the crucifix. "So we are to sit by while that thing devours her alive?" No one answered. That night, the village came. They had heard the screams. They had seen the storm tear the shutters free. and now they gathered outside the cottage, clutching lanterns, their faces grim with fear and suspicion. Beauchesne stepped out to meet them, his body stiff with fatigue. The blacksmith, Rousseau, spoke first. "We heard her voice, Father. We heard it in the night. That was no girl." A murmur of agreement rippled through the crowd. "She is cursed," another man spat. "You know it as well as we do." Louise appeared in the doorway, pale and trembling. "Please, she is still my daughter." "Your daughter died the day she wrote in that book," Rousseau snapped. Etienne stormed forward, scythe in hand. "Say another word, and I'll gut you where you stand." The villagers recoiled, but none dispersed. Their fear outweighed their caution. Beauchesne raised a weary hand. "Go back to your homes, I will tend to her." "You cannot fight what she has brought upon us," Rousseau said, his lantern casting his face into sharp lines. "If you will not act, we will." For a moment, Beauchesne thought Etienne might strike the man down, but Louise pulled her husband back, clutching his sleeve with desperate hands. "Please, not now. Not in front of the children." The crowd dispersed slowly, muttering, their lanterns flickering like will-o'-the-wisps as they vanished into the rain-heavy night. Beauchesne stood in the doorway long after, watching the mist settle over the fields. His thoughts burned with dread. If the church abandoned them and the village turned against them, what remained? Only this cottage, this family, and himself. And he was faltering. Near midnight, as silence reclaimed the house, Marie-Claire stirred. Louise had fallen asleep by the hearth, the children curled against her. Etienne snored fitfully on the bench, the scythe leaning within arm's reach. Beauchesne alone remained awake, sitting vigil beside the girl. Her lips parted. A whisper escaped. "Father." He leaned close. Her eyes fluttered, half open, their glow dimmed. She looked younger in that moment, like the girl who had once sung at Mass with such clear voice. "Marie-Claire," he murmured. Her lips trembled. "It hurts." His chest ached. He reached for her hand, but stopped short, fear holding him back. "Tell me, what hurts?" Her eyes rolled, and for a heartbeat they gleamed faintly again. The hunger. Her body shuddered. A ripple spread through her belly, faint but undeniable, as though something stirred beneath her skin. Beauchesne recoiled, his throat dry. Marie-Claire's voice shifted, guttural, layered. "Do you not see, Father? You prayed, and yet they still eat." A sound rose in the stillness. Chewing. Not from the floor this time. Not from the rafters. From inside her. The house fell into a suffocating stillness once the bishop departed. His absence left a strange hollowness, as though a figure of authority, however distant and cold, had been keeping the entire ordeal tethered to earthly order. Now, with him gone, the air seemed heavier, laden with something unspoken, something feral that did not belong. Father Moreau lingered in the front room for a long while, staring at the closed door. His hands trembled despite the stillness of his body. He would not admit it to anyone, but the bishop's dismissal had shaken him. He had hoped for the church's full backing, the strength of a hierarchy that would allow him to confront this thing with certainty. Instead, he was left alone, unofficial and perilously exposed. Madame Lefebvre emerged from the kitchen, her apron stained with broth she had prepared, but which no one had eaten. Her face was pale, drawn thin. "Mon père?" she asked, hesitant, as though afraid her voice might break the silence in some dangerous way. He turned to her and nodded. "I will stay the night." A small relief flashed across her expression. She bowed her head. "Merci." "She is not right, Father. She has not slept since dawn. She sits in her room whispering." "Whispering what?" Madame Lefebvre's lips parted, then closed again, uncertain. She finally said, "It sounds like Latin, but twisted. Not words I recognize." Father Moreau pressed his thumb and forefinger against his temples. He needed clarity. With a quiet motion, he gestured for her to remain downstairs, then ascended the narrow steps toward Claire's room. Each wooden tread groaned under his weight, as though reluctant to carry him closer to the source of the corruption. At the door, he heard it clearly. A stream of syllables hissed in rapid, low cadence. Not childish muttering, but deliberate. He leaned closer. Dies, aeternum, umbra, sanguinem. His throat tightened. It was indeed Latin, but fractured, stitched with phrases that carried the weight of liturgical inversion, words that in prayer would sanctify, but here were twisted into profanation. He knocked softly. "Claire?" The voice inside ceased instantly. Silence swallowed the hallway. He opened the door. Claire sat upright on the bed, knees tucked under her chin, her hair draping over her face like a veil. She did not look at him. The candle at her bedside had burned low, the wax pooled like melted skin. "Claire," he said gently, stepping closer. "It is me, Father Moreau. May I speak with you?" Her head tilted slightly, just enough to suggest acknowledgement, though no words followed. He sat in the chair near the bed, folding his hands on his knees. "I know this must be frightening," he said carefully, "but you are not alone. The Church—" He paused, correcting himself. "God himself has not abandoned you." At this, her lips curved. It was not a smile of comfort, but something that carried mockery. She raised her head slowly, and her eyes caught the candlelight. They were not the bright, spirited eyes he remembered from months before. They were flat, almost lifeless, yet glimmering with a strange satisfaction. "Dieu," she whispered, her voice roughened, alien. "Il n'est pas ici." God is not here. Father Moreau froze. His pulse hammered in his ears. He forced his composure, answering quietly. "That is not true." She leaned forward. Her voice grew louder, thick with scorn. "Il n'écoute pas. Pas pour elle, pas pour toi." He does not listen. Not for her. Not for you. Her words struck deeper than he wished to admit. For a fleeting instant, he felt the heavy doubt that had crept into his prayers these past weeks, his loneliness, his faltering certainty. But he banished the thought, drawing the crucifix from around his neck. He held it upright. "In nomine Patris, et Filii, et Spiritus Sancti." The words had barely left his lips when Claire convulsed. She snapped back violently, her body arching against the wall behind her bed. A guttural, bestial cry tore from her throat, nothing like the voice of a young woman. Her hands clawed at the sheets, twisting them into knots. Father Moreau remained seated, his hand steady with the crucifix, though his own body trembled. He whispered scripture, voice steady, even as hers rose into a harsh, mocking laughter. From downstairs came the sudden crash of a plate breaking, followed by Madame Lefebvre's startled cry. The priest nearly rose, but Claire's gaze pinned him to the spot. Her voice dropped to a chilling whisper. "If you leave, she will not survive the night." He swallowed hard, clutching the cross tighter. "What do you want?" Claire's head jerked unnaturally to the side, her lips parted, and the words slid out like poison. "Pas elle, toi." Not her, you. The candle extinguished without a touch of wind. The room fell into darkness. The darkness was not total. The faint glow of the moon pressed through the shutters, casting pale stripes across the room. Father Moreau sat frozen in his chair, the crucifix still gripped tightly in his hand. Claire's silhouette was rigid on the bed, her head cocked at an unnatural angle, eyes fixed upon him as though she could see him more clearly in the dark than he could see her. For a long stretch of seconds, neither moved. The silence itself seemed to thrum, alive, like a pulse under the skin of the house. Then she spoke again. "Tu sens ça, père?" Her voice was deep, almost male. "La maison respire avec toi." "Do you feel it, Father? The house breathes with you." He forced air into his lungs and whispered a prayer under his breath. The words steadied him. He had faced the sick, the dying, the blasphemous confessions of war. He could not, would not, let this voice undo him. "Claire," he said firmly, "this is not you. I will not let it take you further." A low laugh slithered from her throat, and in the faint light, he saw her body shifting closer without the sound of footsteps, as if she were gliding. She stopped at the very edge of the bed. The air between them chilled, and a thin sheen of frost began to spider across the brass bed frame. Downstairs, Madame Lefebvre's footsteps hurried up the staircase, her voice breaking the tension. "Mon père, are you—" "Stay out!" he barked, louder than intended. His own voice startled him, harsh in a way he hadn't heard before. The footsteps froze, then retreated back down the stairs. The house returned to silence. He turned back to Claire. She was smiling now. That smile again, wrong, stretched, too knowing. "You are already mine," she murmured. Father Moreau rose suddenly from the chair, forcing courage into motion. He placed the crucifix against her forehead. For an instant nothing happened. Then she screamed, a violent shriek that rattled the shutters and made the timber beams groan. Her body convulsed, throwing her backward across the bed. The crucifix grew hot in his hand. Not warm, scalding. He nearly dropped it, but he held fast, pressing it harder, chanting the prayer through clenched teeth. Sweat rolled down his temples. Her body went still. For a moment, it seemed as though the struggle had ceased. Her chest heaved, her mouth slackened, and he glimpsed just for an instant the face of the frightened girl beneath the corruption. "Father," she whispered weakly, voice her own again. "Please. It hurts." He faltered, his arm lowered slightly. "Claire?" Her eyes fluttered open, softer, human. "Don't. Leave me." Emotion tightened his chest. He leaned closer, whispering reassurance. "I will not leave. God has not forsaken you." But then her pupils widened into endless black, consuming the whites of her eyes. Her lips curled again, splitting into that cruel grin. "And neither have I." A violent force slammed him backward into the chair. The crucifix clattered to the floor. His breath punched from his lungs. He scrambled for it, but his limbs felt heavy, pinned by something unseen. Claire had not moved from the bed, yet it was as though invisible hands pressed him down. Her voice filled the room, layered, multiple, as if spoken by many throats at once. "Tu veux sauver l'âme d'un enfant? Commence par sauver la tienne. You wish to save the soul of a child? Begin by saving your own." His heart pounded so hard he thought it might burst. His mind grasped at the bishop's warning earlier that day. The church cannot be drawn into hysteria. He realized with a shiver that if he fell here, if his faith broke, no one would come to help her. He dug his nails into the arm of the chair, forcing his body to move. Inch by inch he reached the crucifix. His fingertips brushed the metal. The heat pulsed into him again, but this time it steadied him instead of burning. With a final wrench of effort, he clutched it and lifted it high. The pressure vanished. He gasped air, staggering to his feet. Claire collapsed onto the bed, her body limp. Father Moreau remained where he was, chest heaving, the crucifix trembling in his grip. His mind reeled with what he had heard, what it implied. This was not merely a struggle for Claire's life. It was now his trial as well. From below, Madame Lefebvre called in a trembling voice, "Mon père, do I fetch the doctor?" He swallowed, staring at Claire's motionless form. "No," he called back, his voice hoarse. "No doctor, only prayer." As he turned to leave the room, a faint sound stopped him cold. It was the journal, the same one they had burned. From within the desk drawer, long locked, came the wet sound of pages turning. The sound was unmistakable. Pages, damp and swollen, turning one by one. Father Moreau froze in the doorway, the crucifix still clutched in his hand. His gaze drifted to the desk in the corner. The drawer rattled faintly, as though something inside pressed against it, testing its confinement. He crossed the room slowly, each step measured. His fingers hesitated on the drawer's handle before pulling it open. There it was. The journal, charred at the edges from the fire, but intact, worse, alive. Its pages glistened as though soaked in some thick moisture, yet when he leaned closer, no water dripped. A smell rose from it, acrid and earthy, like soil turned after heavy rain mixed with blood. Claire stirred on the bed. "Father?" Her voice was faint, but still hers. He turned sharply toward her. "Do not look," he said. more command than request. "Close your eyes." But her gaze, weak though it was, had already fallen upon the drawer. Her expression shifted from fear to something sharper, recognition. "It speaks to me," she whispered. "No." His voice cut through the room. He slammed the drawer shut, clutching the crucifix tighter. His mind reeled. They had burned it. They had watched it burn. Yet here it was, wet and whole, as if the fire had been nothing more than a breath of wind. Claire's body tensed. She sat upright with sudden strength, her hands digging into the mattress. Her voice dropped into that layered, impossible resonance. "You cannot take her from me. The words are written. They belong to me." The drawer burst open on its own. The journal flew out, landing open on the floor. Its pages turned violently, stopping on a passage stained darker than the rest. Moreau bent down only for an instant, and what he read froze him. "Je t'appartiens, corps et âme." I belong to you, body and soul. And beneath it, written in the same script but in fresh glistening ink, was his own name, Jean Moreau. The crucifix shook in his hand. He stumbled back, his throat tightening. He had never touched the journal, never written in it, yet there it was, his name, as if he too had pledged himself. Claire's laughter rang out, sharp and inhuman. Her eyes glowed faintly in the half-light. "You see, it was never just her. You were called here for a reason." He dropped to his knees beside the journal, his heart pounding. For a moment, despair threatened to swallow him whole. Had his presence, his prayers, his very doubts bound him to this? But then, from deep within, a stubborn flame flared. He pressed the crucifix directly onto the open page. At once, steam hissed upward. The words writhed, the ink shifting like living veins. The journal screamed, not Claire, not the room, but the object itself. A shrill, tearing cry that rattled the windows. Claire collapsed, her body arching violently as though tethered to the book by invisible threads. Her screams intertwined with the journal's, echoing through the house until it seemed the walls themselves might split. "Seigneur Jésus-Christ, protège-nous!" Moreau shouted, forcing the crucifix harder. The pages blackened, curling into ash, yet again that strange moisture resisted, as if trying to keep them alive. He prayed louder, his voice breaking, tears streaming down his face. "Deliver us, O Lord, from the snares of the enemy." With a final deafening crack, the journal split down the center, its pages shriveled inward, collapsing into themselves until nothing remained but a small heap of ash. The room fell silent. Claire crumpled onto the bed, utterly still. Father Moreau staggered to her side, searching for breath, for pulse. His trembling fingers found a faint rhythm at her wrist. Relief flooded him, yet it was thin, fragile. Her chest rose and fell, but her eyes did not open. He sat beside her, whispering prayers softer now, more like lullabies. He remained there through the night, watching the slow rise and fall of her breathing, clutching the crucifix as though it were the last anchor to reality. When morning came, Madame Lefebvre found them. She wept at the sight of her daughter alive, though pale as death. She knelt and thanked the priest, but Father Moreau could not answer her thanks. His gaze lingered on the floor, where the ash of the journal should have been. It was gone. Only a faint wet stain remained on the wood, shaped like a handprint pressed from below. The official record would later describe Claire's recovery as miraculous, though she never spoke of what she remembered. The church never acknowledged Father Moreau's efforts. In truth, he himself gave no testimony. He resigned from parish duties the following spring, retreating into near solitude. What happened in that house remained known only to a handful. Yet in the years that followed, whispers persisted that sometimes, when Moreau prayed alone at night, his voice would falter, as though something prayed with him. And when the Lefebvre home was eventually sold decades later, the new tenants found one thing in the attic, a journal, its pages damp, waiting to be read.